The Middle Ages, a time of kings, knights, castles, epic battles, plagues, and brutal wars. But was it really just 1,000 years of misery, or was it one of the most fascinating times in human history? Let's find out. We begin here with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Roman Empire sits in every man's heart as one of the greatest civilizations that the world has ever seen. But like all things that are beautiful, it was finite and doomed to come to an end. The historian Norman Davies recognizes 4 reasons for the fall of the Western Roman Empire, saying, quote, "The first was the relentless westward drive of the barbarian peoples from Asia into Europe. The second was the growing rift between the western and eastern halves of the Roman world. The third was the steady export of Christianity to the pagan peoples. And the fourth, the rise of Islam, exploding out of the distant Arabia in the 7th century and rapidly set the southern and eastern limits within which the others could interact." End quote. So essentially, you have more and more enemies on the borders, a military that is stretched thin from protecting such vast territories, increasing amounts of migration, and with that a loss of the sense of Romanness, constant political squabbles and near civil wars, a shift in power to the east from Rome to Constantinople, a growing religion, Christianity, throwing a wrench in old customs, a new religion, Islam, chomping at the bit to spread globally, a decadent ruling class with an often declining economy that required many slaves, and frequent plagues and illnesses wiping out populations. The shift from west to east happened under Emperor Constantine for a number of reasons. First of all, Rome was facing regular attacks from barbarians and was becoming increasingly hard to protect. Secondly, the city was quite old and in many ways was beginning to decay. Thirdly, Constantinople was surrounded by water on 3 sides, which made it ideal for trade and defense. Lastly, the empire was finding a new identity as a Christian empire, and it needed a new home to centralize its new identity. And why did we see so many enemies crossing Roman borders? This mostly stemmed from the Huns. The Huns likely originated from what is now modern-day Kazakhstan. They were a nomadic group of fierce warriors who fought on horseback and could move at incredible speeds, covering thousands of miles over the course of a summer. They were incredible marksmen, with their bows and arrows firing from horseback, and often overwhelming their enemies with their speed and precision. The greatest Hun leader, Attila the Hun, unified the Hunnic tribes and became one of Rome's fiercest enemies. Under Attila, the Huns launched major invasions of the Eastern Roman Empire, sacking cities in the Balkans and forcing Emperor Theodosius II to pay tribute. In 451 AD, Attila invaded Gaul, but was stopped at the Battle of Catalaunian Plains, also called the Battle of Chalons, by a coalition of Romans and Germanic tribes led by Flavius Aetius. In 452 AD, Attila invaded Italy and threatened Rome, but withdrew after meeting Pope Leo I, possibly due to famine, disease, or internal issues. Attila died of a blood clot on his wedding night, and without their leader, the Hunnic Empire essentially dissolved. As the Hun were moving west, though, they came in contact with countless tribes who were totally incapable of resisting them. These tribes were such people as the Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Alans, Vandals, Celts, and Burgundians, just to name a few. And you know where all of these tribes headed? You guessed it, the Roman Empire. These tribes often took similar routes and ended up interacting with one another, sometimes violently and sometimes more amicably. Let's break down their histories a bit. The Ostrogoths and Visigoths stem from one common group that we know of simply as the Goths. They originated somewhere north of the Black Sea in Scandinavia and later split into 2 main groups. The Ostrogoths settled in modern-day Russia and Ukraine, while the Visigoths settled in modern-day Romania and Bulgaria. Both had relatively powerful empires in their regions until around the year 375, when the Huns came sweeping through and pushed them into Roman lands. The Visigoths were originally allowed within the Roman territory by the Emperor Valens, but this came with stipulations such as high taxes and often not enough to eat. In 378, the Visigoths rebelled and defeated the Roman Empire at the Battle of Adrianople, killing Emperor Valens. The Visigothic leader Alaric I tried to negotiate peace with the empire but was repeatedly betrayed, and in 410 AD he sacked Rome. They then settled in southern Gaul, but were eventually kicked out by the Franks, so they established territories in Spain, which they ruled until the Umayyad Muslims defeated them in 711 AD. They were initially Arian Christians, but later turned into Catholics. After the invasion of the Huns, the Ostrogoths became vassals of the Hunnic Empire and were forced to fight in their armies. But after Attila the Hun's death, they regained their independence, and the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno made a deal with the Ostrogothic leader Theodoric the Great to have the Ostrogoths overthrow the barbarian king Ottokar, who had deposed the last Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. This event marks what historians consider the official fall of the Western Roman Empire. In 493 AD, Theodoric defeated and killed Ottokar, and then he ruled as king of Italy until 526 when he died. The Eastern Roman Emperor Julian I saw this as an opportunity to retake Italy, which he did by battling back and forth with the Ostrogoths, who lost much of Italy, then retook Rome under King Totila in 546 AD, and then got crushed by the Eastern Roman general Narses at the Battle of Taginae and the Battle of Mons Laecterius. This basically destroyed their empire. The Alans came from modern-day Iran. They migrated north of the Black Sea, where they integrated with the Goths. At the time of the Hun invasion, some served with the Hun, and others fled to Spain and North Africa to join the Vandals. The Vandals originated in northern Germany and Scandinavia and migrated to the upper Danube. They were pushed out by the Huns, so they moved to Spain, where they settled until the Visigoths pushed them into northern Africa, where they seized Carthage, and with their king Gaiseric, they sacked Rome in 455 AD. In 533 to 534, the Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian I launched a campaign against them, led by the general Belisarius. The Vandals were decisively defeated, and their kingdom was absorbed into the Eastern Roman Empire, marking the end of their political power. The Celts were a diverse group of tribes inhabiting Gaul, Iberia, and the British Isles. They stormed Rome in 290 BC and Greece in 279 BC. They were often massive with red hair, and they terrified everyone. Eventually, they settled in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Cornwall. As previously mentioned, the official fall of the Western Roman Empire took place when the barbarian King Ottokar deposed the last Western Roman emperor in 476 AD. Now moving over to Britain. In 410, with more intense battles happening closer to the capital, the Roman Empire completely abandoned Britain. This left it open to being fought over by all sorts of tribes from the continent. The Jutes came from Denmark, and the Angles and Saxons came from Germany, and they fought over territory in England. These three groups over time melded into one group that we now know of as the Anglo-Saxons. This proved to be too strong of a force for the native Britons, who were essentially Romanized Celts. Britons did put up a pretty good fight though, including under the legendary King Arthur, but by the 7th century most of England was controlled by the Anglo-Saxons. We then got the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, East Anglia, and Kent. The Celts had Wales, Scotland, and Cornwall. Many Celts moved to the Highlands where they defeated the Picts. In the late 8th century, the Vikings, Norse warriors from Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, began raiding Britain, and soon ruled parts of England, establishing the Danelaw. In 1016, King Knut the Great ruled England, Denmark, and Norway. In 1066, the Norman conquest took place under William the Conqueror, and then the Normans ruled the island. The Normans built castles, introduced feudalism, and reshaped Britain's culture, merging Anglo-Saxon and Norman traditions into what became medieval England. In 1215 AD, King John of England signed the Magna Carta, significantly limiting the power of the English monarch, establishing the principle that even a king was subject to the law, and guaranteed certain rights to citizens, influencing legal and political systems globally. The Normans then sought control of Scotland and Wales. Wales was conquered by Edward I in 1282, becoming part of England, and Scotland fiercely resisted with wars led by William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. Scotland remained independent until the Union of Crowns in 1603. And of course, much of Ireland was under Anglo-Norman control from the 12th century onwards until about 1919. Moving back to the mainland, Clovis defeated the last Roman general of Gaul, Syagrius, before conquering the rival Riparian Franks, the Alemanni, the Burgundians, and in 507, the Visigoths of Aquitaine. Putting all the lesser Frankish princes to death and taking a Christian wife, Claudita, he was baptized in the Rhimes, possibly on Easter 496. The result was a huge Merovingian realm stretching from the Pyrenees to Bavaria. Clovis reputedly received a diadem from the emperor in Constantinople, together with the honorific title of consul. He died in his new capital, Paris, after a reign of 30 years. Clovis is remembered as the founder of France, and his conversion set the Franks apart from other Germanic tribes who were mostly Arian Christians. Back in Constantinople, Justinian I became emperor in 527 AD. He aimed to reconquer the lost Western Roman Empire. His greatest general, Belisarius, led campaigns to reclaim North Africa from the Vandals and Italy from the Ostrogoths. He briefly restored Roman rule over Italy, North Africa, and southern Spain, but the wars drained the empire's resources. He ordered the creation of the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the Justinian Code, in 529 AD, and this legal system influenced European law, the Catholic Church, and modern legal systems. He built the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople in 537 AD, which became a masterpiece of Byzantine architecture. He rebuilt much of Constantinople after the Nika riots in 532 AD, which nearly overthrew him. He promoted Orthodox Christianity and fought heresies, especially monophysitism. There was also the Plague of Justinian in 541 to 542 AD, one of the deadliest pandemics in history, which weakened the empire. And he was at constant war against the Persians, Slavs, and Lombards, which drained Byzantine resources. And after Justinian's death in 565 AD, his empire slowly declined, losing many of its reconquered territories. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Italy became contested by the Lombards, Byzantines, and Franks. The Franks defeated the Avars, which led to their collapse, allowing Slavs to move further west. Germans began to move into Austria. Poles, Czechs, and Slavs began to form as distinct peoples. The Khazars began to move from the steppes. Slavs took control more of Eastern Europe, like the Balkans. And as previously mentioned, the Eastern Roman Empire sought to regain lost territories of the Western Roman Empire, so here's a little more elaboration on that. Quoting again from Norman Davies, in 540, Belisarius took the Gothic capital of Ravenna, but 13 years of war remained. Rome was subjected to 2 more punishing sieges. The occupation of Totila in 546 proved far more destructive than anything inflicted by Alaric or Genseric. His Gothic troops breached the walls, burned the gates, and departed the citizens. Most ominously, they smashed the arches of the aqueducts." End quote. In 553, the campaign of Narses, an aging eunuch of the palace, completed what Belisarius had begun. Italy was restored as an imperial province with a governor at Ravenna. The Ostrogoths and the Horde were dispersed. In 554, the imperialists attacked Spain, driving the Visigoths into the central plateau and re-establishing a Roman province in the south. The destruction had left Rome susceptible to a new enemy, the Lombards. In the late 6th century, the Lombards, a Germanic tribe, took much of Italy, threatening Rome, though they never actually gained control of the city, just much of Italy. The Pope turned to the Franks for protection. In 754 AD, Pepin the Short, king of the Franks, defeated the Lombards and granted the Pope control over central Italy, forming the Papal States. The Persians during the Sassanid dynasty were incredibly powerful. They besieged the walls of Constantinople in 609 and 625. In 625, they were joined by the Avars, a Mongolian-originated group who had recently been battling the Franks in Hungary, as well as some Slavs. Ultimately, though, the Byzantines were victorious. In 617, Persia had already captured Damascus and Jerusalem, where they seized the True Cross, and by occupying Egypt, they had cut off the empire's welfare program. In 622, a great Christian army marched to Jerusalem, leaving Constantinople to the Persian Avar siege. The troops marched to Persia, plundered the palace of Chosroes at Dastigar, and recovered the True Cross. Unfortunately, though, both the Byzantines and Persians were weakened by their battles, which made a perfect entry point for the Arabs. Born in Mecca in 570 AD, Muhammad belonged to the powerful Quraysh tribe. At age 40 in 610 AD, he received his first revelation from the angel Gabriel in the cave near Mecca. Facing persecution, Muhammad and his followers migrated to Medina in 622 AD. This event, called the Hijra, marks the start of the Islamic calendar. In 630 AD, Muhammad returned to Mecca with an army and took control. He cleansed the Kaaba of idols, establishing it as the holiest site in Islam. By the time of his death in 632 AD, much of Arabia had accepted his religion. After Muhammad's death, his successors, the caliphs, led the Muslim community. The first 4 caliphs expanded Islam across Persia, the Levant, Egypt, and North Africa. Internal conflicts led to the Sunni-Shia split over leadership succession. The Umayyads, based in Damascus, expanded Islam to Spain, North Africa, and Central Asia. Constantinople was unsuccessfully besieged on 2 occasions, in 673 and 717, but the Byzantine navy was able to defend the city with the use of Greek fire. In 711 AD, the Umayyad Caliphate to North Africa sent an army led by the Berber general Tariq ibn Ziyad to invade the Iberian Peninsula. The Moors defeated the Visigothic king Roderick at the Battle of Guadalete, quickly conquering most of Spain and Portugal. Their rule lasted until the Reconquista, which we will cover later. The Battle of Tours in 732 AD stopped further expansion into Europe. This battle took place when the Frankish military leader and ruler Charles Martel met the Umayyad Caliphate in pitched battle in France and successfully defeated them. His grandson, Charlemagne, became king of the Franks and emperor of the Romans. This title was given to him in St. Peter's Basilica on Christmas Day in 800 AD by Pope Leo III, after Charlemagne had essentially created a unified Christian empire, known as the Holy Roman Empire. He had successfully conquered the Lombards in Italy, defeated pagans in Germany, topped Muslim forces in Spain, and crushed the Avars in Central Europe. Charlemagne's kingdom was governed much more closely. It had a number of courts, 300 counties, and a count heading each of them. They had a strong sense of law and order, a standardized silver coinage, obligatory tithe, and the banning of various pagan practices. After Charlemagne's death, the Treaty of Verdun produced a 3-way split between the surviving grandsons. Charles the Bald received the Western Roman sector, Nuestria, Aquitaine, West Burgundy, and Spanish March. Lothair I, king of Italy, received the title of emperor together with the Middle Kingdom, consisting of Austrasia, Eastern Burgundy, Province, and Italy, and Louis the German received the bulk of the Eastern, solidly German sector. Expanding a bit on the Holy Roman Empire. After Charlemagne's death, the title of Holy Roman Emperor lost its power for a while. That is until 962, when Otto I of Germany was crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope, which re-established the empire. The empire then became centered in Germany and northern Italy, with the emperor ruling as a protector of the Catholic Church. The investiture controversy in the 11th and 12th centuries was a conflict over who had the right to appoint bishops, the Pope or the Emperor. Emperor Henry IV clashed with Pope Gregory VII, leading to the emperor's famous Walk of Canossa to seek forgiveness. Frederick I Barbarossa tried to strengthen imperial power but was defeated by the Lombard League in Italy. His grandson, Frederick II, was a brilliant ruler but spent most of his time in Italy, leading to German princes gaining more independence. After his death, the empire entered the period of Great Interregnum, where no strong emperor ruled. Emperor Charles IV issued the Golden Bull of 1356, formalizing the process of electing the emperor. 7 electors, later more, were given the exclusive right to choose the emperor, weakening central authority. The Habsburg dynasty rose to power in the 15th century, ruling the empire almost continuously, and the empire faced many more struggles, including how to navigate the Protestant Reformation, and was eventually dissolved in 1806 to avoid Napoleon taking the title. Islam had an incredible impact on Christianity, shutting it out from other cultures, and turning Europe into Christianity's main base. The early Christian church had 7 church councils, where they condemned many heresies like Arianism, Pelagianism, Feudalism and Monophysitism. These heresies took a long time to actually expel, though, because many former barbarian tribes subscribed to these heresies. Some churches even began to split off, such as the Armenian, Syrian, and Coptic churches that subscribed to Monophysitism. With Christian cities being captured by Muslims, the 5 holy patriarchs were moved down to just 2, one in Rome and one in Constantinople, which created a direct power conflict between them. Quoting again from Norman Davies, the emancipation of the papacy cannot be pinned to a particular date. The bishops of Rome possessed a large measure of freedom long before they asserted their claims to the supremacy. Growing differences between the Latin and the Greek parts of the church led to frequent schisms of a temporary nature, but not to an irreparable breach. Oddly enough, it was the first 4 centuries when Rome was still the heart of the empire. The Roman Church had often been dominated by Greeks and by Greek culture. Leo I was the first to emphasize its Latinity. In the same period, the Latin patriarchs broke free from immediate political control, sheltering behind the city of Rome in as many a phrase with the civil power." End quote. The title of Pope had once been affectionately applied to all bishops, but over the centuries it began to be reserved for the Bishop of Rome. This is really how the papacy as we know it today was born. Insert the Vikings. These were a bunch of different tribes from Scandinavia who were forced to move because of overpopulation or disagreements with local powers, beginning in the late 8th century and ending sometime in the late 11th century. As I previously mentioned, they made it to England, where they sacked monasteries and proved to be real trouble for the English kings. They established the Danelaw, which were Viking-controlled regions, and in 1016, the Viking Knut the Great ruled England, Denmark, and Norway. In the 9th century, the city of Paris was besieged and sacked multiple times, and eventually a permanent settlement was made under Rollo, who created the Duchy of Normandy. Their major colony, Iceland, was settled in 874. They later discovered Greenland, and under Eric the Red, they sailed on to North America, which they called Vinland. The city of Dublin was also founded by Vikings somewhere in the mid-9th century. Swedish Vikings operated throughout the Baltic. The ones that made it to Eastern Europe were known as the Rus, and they interacted with Slavs. Rurik, the Varangian, and his sons organized the first durable principality of the Eastern Slavs at Novgorod and Kiev, and they made it to Constantinople, where they became the famous Varangian Guard, who were the fierce warriors guarding the emperors of Constantinople. Eventually, the Vikings had found enough lands to settle in, and had become so thoroughly Christianized that they no longer needed new lands to conquer. Moving now to feudalism. After Charlemagne expanded the Frankish Empire, nobles were rewarded with fiefs, land, in exchange for military service. With so many enemies and relatively weak kings, lords built castles and hired knights to protect their lands. The king granted lands, fiefs, to nobles in exchange for military support. Nobles, which were lords and barons, controlled large territories and pledged loyalty to the king. Knights, or vassals, served nobles by providing military service in exchange for land, and peasants, who were serfs and freemen, worked the land in exchange for protection and shelter. Back in Constantinople, Basil II proved to be quite a strong leader, and ruled for nearly 50 years, the longest of any Roman emperor. He was nicknamed the Bulgar Slayer after defeating the First Bulgarian Empire and expanding the Eastern Roman Empire's borders further than they had been for centuries. One of his most important acts was marrying his sister Anna to Vladimir I of Kiev in exchange for military support. The soldiers he sent became known as the previously mentioned Varangian Guard. This led to the Christianization of the Kievan Rus. Quoting again from Norman Davies, missionaries were later sent into the country to teach a variant of Orthodoxy, popularized in Bulgaria by Saint Clement, together with the Old Church Slavonic liturgy, the Cyrillic alphabet, and loyalty to the Patriarch of Constantinople. Churches were built, and heathen shrines were demolished. Henceforth, Rus was to be an unshakable member of Christendom." End quote. The settlement of Moscow on the river Moskva was first recorded in 1146. I should also mention one of my favorite battles in history, which is known as the Battle of the Ice, which took place in 1242 between the united forces of the Republic of Novgorod and Suzdalya, defeated a group of Teutonic knights on the frozen lake Peipus, preventing the spread of Catholic Christianity into the Orthodox East. Just picture that, a bunch of Rus fighting a bunch of knights on a frozen lake. Now we move to the Great Schism. This happened because of theological disputes, such as the Filioque controversy, where the Western Church added "and the Son" to the Nicene Creed without consulting the Eastern Church, and the East rejected this change. Differences in practices, such as the use of unleavened versus leavened bread in the Eucharist, the idea of papal authority, where the Pope in Rome claimed supremacy over all Christians, and the Eastern Church, led by the Patriarch of Constantinople, rejected papal authority and believed that all bishops were equal. There was also some political conflict. The Byzantine Empire and the Holy Roman Empire in the West competed for influence, and the Norman conquests of southern Italy worsened relationships between Rome and Constantinople as well. And this led to a breaking point in 1054, where Pope Leo IX sent Cardinal Humbert to Constantinople to demand submission to Rome. The Patriarch of Constantinople refused, leading to a heated dispute. Humbert excommunicated the Patriarch of Constantinople, and in response, the Patriarch excommunicated the papal legates. This formalized the split between the Roman Catholic Church in the West and the Eastern Orthodox Church in the East, and they never came back together again. Soon afterward, on April 14th of 1059, Pope Nicholas II decreed the papal election should be conducted by a college of cardinals cardinals. The move was designed to assert the independence of the papacy and to avoid the scenes of the previous year when two rival popes had been appointed by two rival factions. Back in Constantinople, the Byzantines suffered a disastrous defeat against the Seljuk Turks at Manzikert, losing most of modern-day Turkey. This defeat weakened the empire, forcing the Byzantine emperors to seek help from Western Europe, which helped start the Crusades. So the reasons for the Crusades are that Christians sought to reclaim the Holy Land, Jerusalem, from Muslim rule. The Pope used the Crusades to increase Catholic influence and unite Christian Europe. The Byzantine Empire requested help against the advancing Seljuk Turks. Many knights and nobles sought wealth, land, and adventure in the east. And Italian cities like Venice and Genoa supported the Crusades for trade benefits. So let's go ahead and go through each of the Crusades. The First Crusade lasted from 1096 to 1099. It was called by Pope Urban II in 1095, and Crusaders captured Jerusalem in 1099, establishing a Christian kingdom in the Holy Land. The Second Crusade was led by King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany, and it failed to retake lands lost to Muslims, lasting from 1147 to 1149. The Third Crusade was launched after Saladin recaptured Jerusalem in 1187, and Richard I of England, Philip II of France, and Frederick Barbarossa fought but failed to retake Jerusalem. A truce allowed Christians to visit the city. The Fourth Crusade lasted from 1202 and 1204, and instead of fighting Muslims, Crusaders attacked and looted Constantinople, a Christian city. The Fifth through the Ninth Crusade failed to make any really lasting gains, and in 1291 the last Christian stronghold, Acre, fell to the Muslims, marking the end of the Crusades. Then we get the invasion of the Mongols. The Mongols were nomadic herders moving across the Eurasian steppe. They lived in tribes, often engaging in raids and warfare with each other. They were skilled horsemen and archers using fast cavalry tactics, kind of like the Huns. Born as Temujin, Genghis Khan united the Mongol tribes through diplomacy, alliances, and conquest. He attacked the Jin dynasty in northern China in 1211, capturing Beijing by 1215. The southern Song dynasty resisted but was conquered by Kublai Khan in 1279. Kublai Khan became the first Yuan dynasty emperor. Under Bantu Khan, Mongols invaded Russia, destroying Kiev in 1240, continued into Poland and Hungary, defeating European knights in 1241. The Mongols only stopped after the death of Ogedei Khan, forcing a retreat. In 1258, the Mongols sacked Baghdad, ending the Islamic Golden Age, and they ended up capturing most of the Middle East, though they failed to conquer Egypt. From 1271 to 1295, Marco Polo traveled to China to document Mongol rule. After the era of the Mongols, many cities in the Kievan Rus were destroyed, such as Kiev. Prince Ivan I of Moscow became the Grand Prince, which was granted to him by a Mongol Khan, and gave him power in the region. As the Mongols lost their power, the influence of Moscow grew more and more. And I'm sure you've heard of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were a medieval Christian military order founded in the 12th century to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. The Templar Knights took monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, combining a warrior lifestyle with religious devotion. Eventually they became involved in banking and financial services and gained large amounts of wealth and power. King Philip IV was heavily in debt to them and began persecuting them in order to preserve and expand his wealth and power. Pope Clement V initially tried to resist Philip's demands, but eventually succumbed to pressure, issuing a papal bull that instructed all Christian monarchs in Europe to arrest all Templars and seize their assets. In 1312, under pressure from King Philip, Pope Clement V reluctantly dissolved the Knights Templar. By the late 14th century, the Western Church was beginning to have another schism, this time with multiple popes. You had the Avignon papacy. This pope resided in Avignon, France, under French influence rather than in Rome. This created resentment, especially among non-French Christians. Pope Gregory XI moved back to Rome, but died soon after in 1378. The Romans pressured cardinals to elect an Italian pope, Urban VI, but many later rejected him and elected a rival, Clement VII, who ruled from Avignon. This resulted in two rival popes, one in Rome and one in Avignon, each excommunicating each other. European rulers took sides. France, Scotland, Spain, and Naples supported the Avignon Pope. England, the Holy Roman Empire, and northern Italy backed the Roman Pope. In 1409, the Council of Pisa tried to solve this crisis by electing a third pope, Alexander V, but neither of the other two popes resigned. Now, three popes claimed authority, further dividing Christendom. The Council of Constance in 1414 to 1417 deposed all three popes and elected Pope Martin V, ending the schism. In 1337, the 100 Years' War began between England and France and lasted until 1453. The war was primarily fought over the French throne, as the English kings claimed a right to rule France. The English king, Edward III, claimed the French throne after the death of Charles IV of France, but the French rejected him and crowned Philip VI instead. There was also territorial conflicts, where England controlled parts of France, Gascony, Normandy, and Flanders, which the French wanted to reclaim, and economic factors, where both nations wanted control over the wealthy Flemish trade and resources in France. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, England used longbowmen, which crushed the French knights. But soon the Black Death disrupted the war, weakening both sides. At the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, the French King John II was captured, leading to the Treaty of Bretagne, which favored England. At the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, England's Henry V won a decisive victory, leading to the Treaty of Troyes, which made him heir to the French throne. But in 1429, Joan of Arc inspired the French at the Siege of Orleans, leading to Charles VII's coronation. The French, using gunpowder artillery, retook most of their territory. And the Battle of Castilian in 1453 was the final battle, where the French decisively defeated the English. Expanding a bit on the Black Death, this was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, killing an estimated 25 to 50 million people in Europe between 1347 and 1351. Caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, it spread rapidly through fleas and rats, devastating societies and altering the course of European history. The plague likely began in China or Central Asia, spreading along the Silk Road. Mongol armies who were besieging Kaffa allegedly catapulted plague-infected bodies over the city walls, infecting Genoese merchants. These merchants brought the diseases to Italy, France, Spain, England, and Germany within a few years. There were a few different types of this plague: the bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic. The War of the Roses was a series of civil wars in England, fought between the rival houses of Lancaster and York. It was a struggle for the English throne lasting from 1455 to 1487, and ultimately led to the rise of the Tudor dynasty. In 1469, we get the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella, uniting Castile and Aragon, strengthening Christian Spain. And in 1492, at the fall of Granada, the last Muslim kingdom surrendered, officially ending the Reconquista. Spain then enforced religious unification under Catholic rule, expelling Jews and Muslims. So now let's briefly discuss the medieval mind. Medieval ethics saw the world as extremely hierarchical, with an obligation to obey the wishes of God and those he ordained to rule on earth. Medieval law consisted of divine laws, as preached by the church and state authorities. Medieval literature was mostly religious in nature. Medieval education consisted of primary learning of letters and numbers, which was largely left to the supervision of the family or the village priest. And secondary learning was supported by the cathedrals and increasingly by city councils. Medieval historiography remained the realm of the chroniclers and annalists. Medieval music was often religious in nature as well, though secular patronage was increasing. Medieval architecture is often called Gothic architecture, and it's generally made of stone, and the ones still standing are generally churches or castles. The end of the medieval period came from three landmark events: the fall of Constantinople to the Turks in 1453, the arrival to the New World of Columbus, and the fall of Granada to the Spaniards in 1492. The final siege of Constantinople began on the 2nd of April 1453, Easter Monday, and lasted for 8 weeks. There were about 7,000 defenders who fought 80,000 Turks, and they managed very well despite the enemy's much greater numbers and the constant bombardment of cannon. But in the end, the enemy's numbers were too great. Quoting again from Norman Davies, "A small sally port, the Kirk port, was left open by retreating Greeks, and the Turks swarmed in. The emperor dismounted from his white Arabian mare, plunged into the fray, and disappeared." End quote. And in Spain, just as they were retaking their land at Granada, they found a whole lot more land in the New World. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, check out my most recent video, which is about the various different Christian denominations and how they differ or are the same. Now, let's continue our journey to rebuild the West here at Western Renaissance. Thanks.